You've probably heard the hype, right? That with enough data, some super powerful AI can predict, well, anything. The stock market, the next viral video, you name it. But today, we're going to dig into a core idea from data science that kind of puts the brakes on all that. It says, hold on a second, not so fast. Turns out there's a fundamental limit to what we can predict, and get this, it has absolutely nothing to do with how powerful your computer is.
I mean, we live in an age of just massive data and, even more massive AI models. So it's really easy to fall into this trap of believing that everything is becoming predictable. This belief, this idea that we're right on the edge of forecasting the future with near-perfect accuracy, well, that's what we're going to call the prediction.
So this myth, it makes a pretty tempting promise, doesn't it? It says, hey, just give me enough data, a powerful enough AI, and the future is basically an open book. But is it really? I mean, can we truly predict everything?
And you see this desire literally everywhere. You've got businesses that are just desperate to forecast their quarterly sales. You've got traders chasing that impossible dream of predicting the next market swing. And of course, marketers who would give anything to know exactly what's going to go viral tomorrow.
So the core assumption here is that the future is just a puzzle, right? And we just need a smart enough algorithm to put all the pieces together. But here's the kicker. What if those puzzle pieces themselves are constantly changing shape? What if some things are just, by their very nature, completely unpredictable?
Okay, so this all brings us to probably the single most important question any forecaster can ask. And here's the really surprising part. It has absolutely nothing to do with picking the latest, greatest, most powerful AI model out there.
This little piece of wisdom from the forecasting world, it just flips the entire process on its head. It tells us to stop, take a breath, and ask a really fundamental question before we even think about building a model. And that question is there a real pattern here? Is there a signal, or are we just wasting our time trying to predict random noise? So you see, the focus completely shifts from which algorithm is the best to, wait a minute, is there anything here to predict in the first place?
So, to answer that question, we need to get our heads around a core concept called the predictability spectrum. Because let's be honest, not all data is created equal.
And that concept is called forecastability. Now, I want you to think of it like a speed limit that's baked directly into the data itself. It's what we call an intrinsic property. This means it doesn't matter how fancy your car is, or in our case, how fancy your AI model is, there's a hard, theoretical limit on how well you can possibly predict this specific set of data.
Okay, so this spectrum here lays it out perfectly. On the one end, you've got your highly forecastable stuff. Think weekly retail demand or energy consumption. These things have really strong repeating patterns, right? Weekly, seasonal, you can count on them. Then, somewhere in the middle, you get things like temperature. Yeah, there are patterns, but it can also be pretty erratic. And then, way down on the other end of the spectrum, that's where you find things like stock price returns, which are just dominated by randomness and noise.
All right, so how do we actually measure this? Well, we can pretty much boil it all down to two key ingredients that decide where any given time series falls on that spectrum. And those two ingredients are memory and surprise.
So first up, let's talk about memory. The question here is super simple. Does today's value have anything to do with yesterday's value? This chart here, this autocorrelation function, visualizes exactly that. You see those tall bars at the beginning? That's the signal. They show that recent events are strongly linked to what's happening now. It's kind of like a song with a really steady beat. What just happened gives you a massive clue about what's coming next. That is strong memory, and it makes things a whole lot easier to forecast.
And on the flip side of memory, you have surprise. I mean, just look at this, that smooth blue wave. It's almost boringly predictable, right? There is zero surprises. You know exactly where it's headed. But that jagged red line, that is pure chaos. It's like random static on a radio. It's just all surprise all the time. So for something to be predictable, it needs to have very low surprise.
Okay. So we know some things have strong memory and low surprise. So what, right? Why does any of this even matter? Well, it matters because focusing our efforts, focusing our expensive models and our time on the right kind of data, the stuff that's actually predictable, has a massive multi-million-dollar payoff.
Let's start with the cost of getting this wrong. When you have poor forecasting, you get stockouts, and that means empty shelves. One study showed this causes an average sales loss of about 4%. Now, 4% might not sound like a lot, but for a billion-dollar company, that's $40 million just left on the table.
And believe it or not, the other side of the coin is just as bad, if not worse. If you overforecast, you end up with mountains of excess inventory. And carrying that stuff, warehousing it, insuring it, it costs a staggering 20 to 30% of its value every single year.
But here's the good news. Here's the upside. When you apply modern forecasting methods to data that is actually forecastable, the results can be absolutely dramatic. We're talking about slashing product unavailability by up to 65%. That means capturing all those lost sales and, just as importantly, keeping your customers happy.
And look, these are not just some theoretical numbers pulled out of a textbook. This is real-world impact. You had a global beverage producer save $9 million a year just from better demand forecasting. For some tech companies, a tiny 1% improvement in their forecast error meant saving over $1 million. The point is, when you focus on what's truly forecastable, the value is just immense.
So the next time you see some bold new prediction or someone tells you their AI can forecast anything, don't just ask, "Oh, what model did you use?" Your most powerful tool is a much, much simpler question. And that is this data even predictable in the first place?